Hey everybody, good morning, welcome, good to see ya. Happy Monday to everybody. Happy Monday, Lisa. How you doing?
Doing all right. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. We're here.
We're back.
Yeah, we're back. Hey, thanks so much for joining us, everybody. Good to see you. We are going to be spending some time in the first few verses of Ephesians 6 today. And we actually are going to finish Ephesians this week, which is pretty crazy. If you weren't with us this weekend online, I actually taught on a significant portion of Ephesians 6. We're going to go over it this week just because of how dense the passage is this weekend. I covered it with a specific lean, but we'll kind of go into it verse by verse like we've done. So if you want to check that out, you can go to ehills.org or check out, if you're watching this on Facebook, you can just scroll down and watch it this weekend too. So as we talk about brothers and sisters, here's my question for you. Kind of what's, do you have older brothers, younger sisters? Like what's your family dynamic as far as siblings go? I'm curious about that. I am the youngest of four. I have two older brothers and one older sister. My oldest brother is 15 years older than me. So it honestly kind of felt like a weird uncle more than a brother. And it really fits his personality too. So it's fine. It's fine.
That's amazing.
There you go. How about for you, Lise? What's your family dynamic?
I have one younger sister. She's 22 months younger.
Abby.
No, that's Anthony's youngest sister.
Oh, shoot. You're right. What's your younger sister?
So my sister is Sarah. She's the one in Seattle.
That's right. That's right. Now I got it. Now I got it.
You're back on track.
Perfect. All right. Well, we're going to say good morning, but like I said, just throw that in there. It'd be fun to learn a little bit more about you guys. Good morning, Linda. Good morning, Crystal. Good morning, Samantha. Good morning, Liz. Good morning, Bree and Aaron E. and Jennifer. Good to see you. Good morning, all. I have one brother, 2 years younger. That's good. Fred, good morning. Samantha, I have two sisters, so 3 girls. All right. That sounds like a busy house. I just always think about like that bathroom situation had to be brutal. Good morning. I have 2 younger sisters. Becky, that's fun. Same kind of deal. 3 sisters. Yep. Leslie, good morning. Good to see you. Here we are, another week in quarantine. Yes. Good morning, David. Happy Monday to you as well. Good morning, Carrie. Leslie, good morning. I have 3 brothers and 1 sister. Nice. So family of 5. That's good. Good morning, Vicky. She has 1 older sister. Lisa, good morning. Peggy, good morning. 4 brothers, 1 sister, all older. So 6 kids, and you are the youngest. I feel like you probably got away with literally everything. I'm the youngest of 4, and I got away with everything.
I was going to say, you have experience there.
Oh, for sure. Yep. I mean, I also had a very unique family dynamic, so the bar was low. Liz, one younger brother, nice. Crystal, I am the oldest of 4 sisters. All right, Mama Bear. Carrie, I have an older brother and a younger sister, so right in the middle. Aaron E, I'm the oldest. I have a sister and 1 brother. Good morning, Greg. One of each. I'm the oldest. Nice. David, I'm the oldest of 4, 2 younger brothers and 1 younger sister. I'm just going to predict that your younger sister got whatever she wanted. That's my good morning. I skipped down it. Darn you, comments. Jeanette, hi guys. A child of 3. I have an appointment with the DMV this morning. Pray it goes well and try not to miss me too much. Well, absolutely. That sounds. I don't want to go to the DMV anytime, but right now, I don't know if it's better or worse, but everyone thinks Abby is Lisa's sister. Sorry about that.
No, that's not wrong. I mean, because there's a lot of like visual things that look similar. And so
that's funny.
I
knew that she was Anthony's sister. I think I just, this just happened. Pete, 2 brothers. They're twins, 2 younger, and we're super close. That's awesome. That's awesome. Linda, I have an older brother and a younger brother. Both passed away too young. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, my goodness. Dom, good morning. Oldest of 3, 2 younger sisters, 5.5 and 6.5 years younger. Youngest has voted the others off for island. Oh, jeez. Family, man. Family is drama. Morning, I'm the eldest of 3. My sister is 6 years younger, and my brother is 12 years younger. But despite the age difference, we're all pretty close. That's awesome. Becky, my middle sister, was born on my 6th birthday. Hey, happy birthday. I bet it's 6. That sounded really fun. And then a few months later, you were like, can I return this gift? Maybe. I don't know. Good morning from Janelle. 2nd of 4, 2 brothers and a sister. Nice. And then Stacy, oldest, younger sister and brother. Shay says, lots of blended brothers, 3-step and 1/2. I only grew up with the 1/2, and he is 12 years older than me. Yeah, that I'm sure created for lots of new, right? And then Gloria said, good morning, 3 sisters. I was the youngest for 9 years, then bumped to the middle. It's a good 9 years till you had it, though.
It's a promotion.
Yeah, it's good. Well, hey, thanks so much for being here today, guys. Thanks for always indulging us with answering those questions. Just fun to learn a little bit more about you and hear from you each morning. We really hope that what we're cultivating is not just the chance to be able to connect each morning, although that's great, but really the opportunity for you to be a self-feeder spiritually, that you develop the habit of spending daily time with God. And so we've been doing that now. We've done Philippians. We did a whole week study. We're finishing Ephesians 6 this week. And then just so you know, next week, we're going to spend 1 week before we start a new series. We're going to spend 1 week kind of doing a basics week around inductive Bible study. So you've heard us talk about observation, interpretation, application, and we do it. But it's a little bit more like you're just kind of watching it rather than seeing what's under the hood. So it'll function in a similar format. But it'll have a little bit more teaching underneath each one of those aspects. So if Bible study has been confusing for you and you're like, oh, I'm glad that you guys just teach it to us, I think it could be really helpful for you to potentially use next week to help even spearhead some of your own study. So same time, same place, all that stuff. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Cool?
Cool.
Awesome. All right, we're going to dive into Ephesians 6. But before we get started, would you mind praying for us?
Yep. God, thank you for another week. I know that the weeks and the days are starting to blend together, but it is a new week and just a new opportunity for us to spend time with you and spend time together in a new and unique way. God, I pray that as we read today, that you would just help us to make connections in what Paul has written, and how we can apply that to the way we live and the way that we interact, not only with our children and our parents, but with everyone around us. God, we just pray all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. All right. Well, we follow this pattern, right? Pray, read, study. Kind of leave it to you to do reflecting and journaling. Maybe that's a part of your day on a regular basis. I'd encourage you to carve that out. Oh, by the way, Mary Pat said, good morning. I'm the youngest of 7 with my sister, the oldest, and 5 brothers between us. Mary Pat, you got everything you wanted, right? Is that how that works? Youngest of 7? Holy smokes.
My mom was the 4th of 6, and she felt like it was almost 2 families of kids. Like there was the older 3 and then the younger 3. So in a sense, she was kind of the oldest because she was the oldest of the youngers.
My mom just started watching this, so I'm just going to stay on here publicly. It was basically like there were the other 3 kids, and then I was so clearly the favorite that it was me. So I'll let her. I mean, she can refute that in the comments if she wants. But
sure.
Everybody
She's just shaking her head right now. She's like, Phil, get to what we're reading.
Exactly, yeah, that's 100%. She's like, I don't start watching until a few minutes in because I just want to get to it. Vicky says, nice haircut, Phil. Good job, Alyssa. That's true. Alyssa cut my hair this weekend. That's why I'm not wearing a hat. It was bad. So
not the experience, the hair.
No, yeah, the hair was bad. Alyssa cut my hair actually all through college, so I knew she'd do great. All right. Ephesians 6. If you've missed any time with us, there's a YouTube page linked in our post each day. You can go check that out. It has our content all throughout Ephesians in it, including the earlier part that we were just in last week. It is a more controversial passage because it talks about husbands and wives and submission and all that stuff. And so I would encourage you, if you missed that one, this passage is really in connection to that passage. And it just extends the family unit out. So that's where we're going to be looking today. Not a ton of verses. So I'm just going to read it. Lisa will bold it for us and we'll dive in. Paul says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. All right. So, like I said, if you were with us last week on Friday, we looked at the end of Ephesians 5 and spent some time talking about this idea of a couple things. One, earlier in chapter 5, Paul's been talking about this old self that we kind of wake up every day wearing. We talked about it kind of like our pajamas, right? Of selfishness, of pride, of whatever. And we have to make the active daily choice to take off the old self and put on the new self, this new self in our identity with Jesus. And then inside of that, he talks about one of the manifestations of that is mutual submission, that we would extend mutual submission to one another, everybody, out of reverence for Christ. And then he kind of borrows that concept in as he talks about how wives should relate to their husbands with this unique responsibility they have for the home, and then talks to husbands about the love that they need to extend to wives, and the idea that it's self-sacrificial love, like Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. And so that was where we spent last week. And then as we click into this week's focus, or today's focus in Ephesians 6, it's interesting, right? Because it doesn't really feel like it belongs in chapter 6. It feels like it belongs in chapter 5. And fun fact, the markers that we have, the verse numbers and chapter numbers, Paul did not write those. He was just writing a letter. And so sometimes when we write them today, or when we read them today, it's important for us to recognize, like, 6 doesn't mean necessarily a new unit of thought. It just means that's the way that somebody marked the verses and chapters. So if you're wondering why it's a new chapter, me too. And so,
because this monk had too much wine when he was.
Oh shoot! I'm sure there is a very good scholarly reason why they did. I'm sure of it. In the beginning, he says children. He's talking about wives. He's talking about husbands. Now he talks about children, and he says, "Obey your parents in the Lord." Interesting, right? Obey your parents. We would kind of expect. But you've highlighted in the Lord specifically as a focus, or I've bolded it. What do you think about this statement in general? What is Paul trying to aim at here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just drawing our attention back to even verse 5:21, where Paul has said, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. It's this reminder that when we're submitting, when we're obeying, when we're honoring, it is not necessarily just for the human that we're interacting with. It really is out of this reverence, out of this honoring of the Lord.
Absolutely. And I think my mom, like last week, I think I joked around that my mom's not a good singer. And she was like, I know where you're going to get in Ephesians. Like, I'm coming for you.
Right.
Anyway, so I get it. But I think there's this tension that we have that if you grew up in a good home with parents that loved you and loved God and had good expectations and boundaries and all those things, then this verse makes tons of sense for you.
Mm-hmm.
But remember the people that Paul is writing to, he's writing from prison to the church at Ephesus. In Ephesus, there are lots of reasons within this kind of Greek system of worship where people were not approaching God the way that was appropriate either within Judaism or this new movement of followers of Jesus. And so one of the things that I think Paul is trying to highlight is exactly what you said. Like, we don't do this for them. Like, we do this for God. We do this because this is the way God has set it up to work best, even when circumstances aren't best. Right. And so, this idea of in the Lord, I think is an interesting disclaimer. I added some commentary work to that phrase, but I think the idea of, hey, what happens if me obeying my parents is hurtful or harmful? What happens if it's not safe, right? And I think this modifier by Paul of in the Lord is this constant point back, just like we talked about last week, this constant point back to say, hey, what does it mean for you to obey, to honor, to care for, but within specific boundaries? And the boundaries are in the Lord. Right. And so if there is a conflict between what it means to be honest, what it means to be caring, what it means to be safe, if there's a conflict between that and honoring and loving and obeying my parents, it's figuring out how do I still honor the spirit of this? I think this is especially challenging for adult children. Because the commentators would say, like, there's no age specifically given to this, but it's very different, right? When I tell my 5-year-old it's bedtime, it's bedtime. Like it's not a, right. I mean, he wants to make it a debate, but it's not a debate. If my mom texted me at night and said, like, hey, I don't know if you're asleep yet, but it's bedtime, like, it's going to have a different angle, and it should have something different to it. Right. And so I think for us to understand this relates at a different level. One of the things that I think would be interesting to even think about for those of you that are watching is, what does it look like if you have parents who are still alive? What does it look like for you to honor and really obey, quote unquote, your parents at this age and stage of your life? Just something to be thinking about. I'd love your thoughts about that.
Well, and I think it's really good to bring in some of this cultural context, because when we go back into what was going on in Ephesus at this time, children were treated more as a property than people. And they lived with almost this daily notion that at any time they could be sacrificed to the goddess Artemis. And so there's a very different child-parent relationship that was going on here. And so for Paul to put this boundary around and say, in the Lord, I mean, that's a huge thing. We kind of gloss over it because we don't live in that tension necessarily, but for his readers right here, that's going to be a big deal.
Yeah, and I think that's a good call out about kind of the difference for children, right? Like, I would say most of the time today, like at a societal level, I'm not describing my own personal feelings most of the time, but at a societal level, I would say that right now, especially in the West, kids are often viewed as an inconvenience, right? A limit to freedom, whatever. But there is almost like a level at times of, I don't think anybody thinks I worship my kids, but I think if an alien race came to planet Earth and non-quarantine looked at our schedules and what we do with, for, and around our kids, they'd be like, so you worship the little ones? Is that the way this works? Like, I mean, that just is. So it's a unique dynamic, whereas kids really were pretty disposable in the culture that we're reading about, whether that was within this cult practice with Artemis and child sacrifice practices, or even more common was kids were, I mean, it wasn't called child labor. It was just called labor. Right. The moment that your kids could work, that could help support, that could do whatever, they did. And so we think about, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds living at home still. For them, that would have been completely unthinkable. I mean, it just wouldn't have happened. And so you've got kids that are in their early teenage years that are living on their own, that are, stepping out into adulthood. So it's a very, very different kind of center of gravity within the culture we're talking about.
Yep.
Interesting. Dave said with respect to his own parents, he said it's harder because they're non-believers, just makes it more of a challenge, but a tremendous opportunity to witness to them. And I think, obviously my dad, for the vast majority of my life, it was like, how do you love and care for somebody and even listen to somebody whose like advice is not good? And so how do you do that well? And I think aiming at that word honor is really, really important. He says, my dad is Jewish and my mom calls herself agnostic. Yeah, that's pickle, David. I appreciate that, man. Be praying about that for sure. My mom, who's watching, grew up Jewish. Maybe she's got some advice. She'll comment in here. She doesn't want to. She's like, I don't want it to be like, oh, Phil's mom commenting, but it's fine. It'd be great, Mom. You should do it. And then it says, honor your father and mother. This is in quotes because this is a quote, right? Not just a quote from Paul in Ephesians. This is a quote from Moses. So he clarifies that, right? He says, this is the first commandment with a promise. I've like linked the text in Ephesians 4-6. And if you go there, the thing that's interesting is it's not like a positive promise. It's a negative promise. In Ephesians 20, it reads this way. It says, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness or anything that is in heaven above or that is in the earth below. It's called iconoclast if you're interested. Or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I am the Lord your God and a jealous God. Here he goes. Visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. Now, I don't know, like this is an interesting reference point, right? Because I don't think generational curses like this exist the same way today that they did in Exodus or that they did in the Old Testament. This is within the Old Covenant. We don't live under the Old Covenant anymore. It's by grace through faith we've been saved, not as a result of our works, so that no one can boast, right? Ephesians 2:8-10. But I think there is this principle that Paul is trying to highlight within the 10 Commandments to be able to focus on like, hey, this, like, we want this to go well for us. If we do not honor our father and mother, it's not going to go well for us. Right. Any further thoughts that you have about that reference, ma'am?
Well, not necessarily about that negative promise reference, which doesn't make you feel all warm and fuzzy inside, right. But it's very true, especially in a society that was dependent on their family to receive that inheritance. But one of the things that I always love about the 10 Commandments is we've got these first commandments that are kind of our relationship with God. But the very next one, before we get into all the you shall nots, is this you shall honor your father and mother. And so it's elevating this family status right below our relationship with God as our relationship with our family.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think when you look at the way the 10 Commandments are broken out, they're kind of broken out that way, right? For us to be able to look at different chunks of our life and the way we show up in it. So that's good. When we look at this specific reference, he goes on and he kind of shares the rest of this promise, right? He says that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. I give a hard time plenty of times to Bible teachers or times where we maybe think God is basically just around for me to get what I want. That is not actually God's primary purpose. God wants to change what I want. He wants to give me what I need today and forever. That's actually his core desire. But when we look at this specific reference, I think, the idea is twofold, right? What does it mean for it to go well with you? And then what does it look like to live long in the land? I think what in terms of relationship, maybe with your parents or relationships you've watched between kids and adults, how do you feel like this go well with you shows up in family relationships?
I think, and this is just speaking from me personally, when I have a relatively good relationship with my parents, it feels like other parts of my life aren't as complicated. We've had kind of some ups and downs in our relationship, and so I can speak from both sides of that. But when I have chosen to be honoring of my parents, it's made other parts of my life just feel more at peace, more at ease, because I'm not wearing that burden of whatever that conflict is between us. And I see
And
that
I
with
think,
my own kids too.
yeah, I absolutely think that's true. I mean, I see it with our kids all the time. We've talked about we talked about this word shalom. That, well, Paul is not writing that word because he's writing in Greek and it's a Hebrew word. Having grown up kind of within that religious system, Paul is looking at this culture and going like, what does it mean to go well with? Well, there's this rhythm of life that's designed to bring peace and to bring calm. And I think one of the things that's really interesting to me is when I look back, I used to do student ministry and family ministry for a long time. And every study that would ever come out, even as smartphones were becoming ubiquitous and everywhere, even as, culture felt like it was devaluing home and all that stuff, every study that's been released, the last one I think I saw was 2018, was that mom and dad, that, the adults in the life of a child are their primary influencers. It's not somebody they saw on TikTok. It's not the celebrity that they watch. It's not their friends. It's their primary influencing parents. And so I think being able to say like that, I think that's wired into us. And the way that we, even from a child to parent relationship, see that show up, it should change the way we parent. And we're going to see that in just a minute. And then live long in the land. This is an interesting thing because it has two different pictures. One picture is showing up how it would have shown up for the Jewish people. For the Jewish people, this meant openness to continue to live together, do life with one another. Oftentimes, especially within the trades, you are working for your parents. Like, you were doing a similar trade that they were doing. In addition to that, you oftentimes had like a home that kind of got built onto in that day, where it would just like make room for your family really close to where your parents were. So this idea, it was almost like you'll be welcome to stay around longer as long as you can maintain good relationships. So, I think we'll be able to talk about what that means and how that shows up. And I publicly apologize for all the ways that I've not honored my parents, because there have been infinite that I've not done that well with. But that's kind of when we think about what is the responsibility of kids to parents. That's what Paul pictures here. And then he says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. Alyssa reminds me of this verse sometimes. What do you think Paul is trying to focus on right here?
Well, the way that I think what he's writing here is kind of going back up to this idea of submission. And hold on, I want to read something because I thought it was just well written. But it said, Christian submission is different from a mere compliance with authority. Loving submission cannot be commanded by the one with the power in a relationship. It can only be given to another as a loving response. And I thought that was just a great way of kind of showing us that when we as parents are not being loving in the way that we should be loving those around us, the response to that is not going to be a loving obedience or a real honoring, this reverence towards. It's going to be an angry response. It'll cause bitterness, and so it's this reminder that, hey guys, the way that you treat your children is going to reflect the way that they respond to you.
I think that's bold. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, right? And when we talk about the way kids are viewed kind of within the culture we're talking about, we have to talk obviously about how fathers show up in this culture, right? in this culture, men in particular, but fathers specifically, basically could do whatever they want. I think kids and wives were basically viewed as possessions. And so the idea that Paul just a few verses earlier had said, hey, husbands, you should love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for, that's already like, this idea of when you love your wife, you love your own flesh. Like that's how connected this is. So he's already like getting in our business. And then here he says, hey, fathers, I know what you could get away with, right? Like the first century version of watching ESPN, the first century version of going out and playing golf all day and abandoning your family for the one day a week, maybe that they get you. There's lots of different reasons that could have shown up in the first century and far worse. And obviously there's still ways, as I've just mentioned, that shows up today. But he says, don't provoke your children to anger. And I do think that there is this idea of like, hey, when my kids are being really nasty, most of the time it is a reflection of my attitude and my current investment in them. And so like, I think I don't like that. I don't like how that feels. I don't like what that says about my schedule. But I think being able to like say, okay, so what needs to change? And in our home, I know like what each kid kind of needs. And so usually when attitudes are starting to go sideways, it's because they're not getting what they need collectively or individually on a consistent basis. But when they do, like they respond in so much healthier a way. And so I think that's true 2,000 years ago, and it's true today.
Right.
And so, not provoking your children to anger, that's lots of different things. That's neglect. That's obviously abuse. That's silly things like teasing, right? Like what are the ways that we are pushing our kids to the line of what we can get away with rather than really, really caring? Liz says, I read somewhere once that said there is nothing more humbling than when your kid starts acting like you. That is very true. Yeah, maybe I've said this before. I've definitely said this publicly before, but I remember Greer, our oldest, when he was a baby and he was like in the car seat and I'm driving just him and me and he's right behind me and there's somebody that like cuts me off or something and I slow down or whatever, brake hard, and I didn't even say anything. But then Greer, who's just learning to talk, goes, "What the?" And I was like, I think I know where he heard that. So
his mother.
Yeah, you're like, uh-oh. Yeah, that came from mom for sure.
Well, and I actually wrote about this a couple years ago, but I was looking at my own daughters and really having a rough time with one of them. And it just became very clear to me that what she was doing, how she was behaving, was this reflection back to me of the things that I don't like about myself. And it was one of, like Liz said, one of the most humbling experiences when that was what was being reflected back to me and how much I didn't like it. It was a gut check for sure.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and you don't maybe know Lisa's kids, but they're the sweetest kids on the planet. So it's got to be her fault. That's how that works.
It's all me.
Adrian says, when a child's provoked, they can provoke others and affect a multitude of people. Absolutely. And I think, Paul's talking about a family system, right? So like we see all of these things, and he's going to talk about bondservants tomorrow. We see all of these things. And I would say in our culture, this one shows up a lot, right? Where people are kind of like walking on eggshells around kids. And Alyssa and I watched a show yesterday. There's like a 15-year-old girl. And I was like, I feel like I'm just looking into my future right now. And I was like, this is difficult. Yes. So yes, the peace can be disrupted. Yes. No doubt.
Yes. We've got a teenager knocking on our door and it's like, oh
yeah, that's this fall for you guys.
Yeah.
It's coming.
Yes. It's coming for us.
It's going to be amazing.
She's practicing and she's just getting so good at it.
It's good. That's so good. And then remember, Paul's worldview, his headset is, hey, dads, you have a unique responsibility in your home to sacrificially love. You will be held accountable as the head of your household. That is how this actually works. I tell people that are like, I don't agree with you on this. I'm like, totally cool. 1,000% fine. I just want to let you know, like, if you're going to be held accountable for it, whether you agree with me or not, you should probably be thoughtful about the way you show up with your wife and your kids. Right. That's all I'm going to say. And so he finishes verse 4. He says, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Why do you think he breaks up these two ideas, right? How should we raise our kids? He says in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Do you think he just wanted to use more words, or do you think there's a distinction between those two?
I mean, Paul was a wordy guy, so that totally could have been one of the things that he was doing. No, I really think because they are different. And I guess if I was writing this, I would have written it the other way. I would have said in the instruction and discipline, because I instruct first, and then if something, if the girls aren't doing what they've been instructed to do, then there's a discipline, there's a consequence for whatever that action was. But I don't know, maybe kind of the construct of why it's written this way, but they are different. In my mind, discipline is one thing. It is the response to an instruction that was given previously that then wasn't followed.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is definitely some nuance behind it. I'm reading some kind of Jewish culture custom stuff into it. So you don't know how much of this is the assumed culture of Ephesus that Paul is writing to, how much of this is himself. But I think what you often see, especially in the way teaching happens with Jewish people, especially with Jewish kids, is that they really are not instantly told why they're doing lots of different things. Like they start with discipline first, and then they weave in the meaning and purpose behind it. But the idea of like, hey, we're going to do this. And if you think about the number of customs and practices that the meaning behind it is too complicated for little kids anyway.
That's true.
So there's like a scaling that has to happen. So a kid's like 2 years old. It's like, hey, we're going to celebrate Passover together. Like, what does this mean? Well, we actually remember back to a moment in Jewish history when we were in Egyptian captivity, partially because God was punishing us, partially because God was supernaturally and providentially allowing us to have supplies grow over time in a way that would have not been possible otherwise. And then he used a series of plagues and eventually taking a child from every family of Egyptians so that we would be freed from captivity. Like there's a level to which it's like, well, why do we celebrate Passover? To remember that God provides, like Jehovah Jireh. I think there's a level in that culture to which it was going to take place over time. But some of my favorite stuff about like hearing how young Jewish students were taught is just amazing. So I'll tell you one that's super nerdy. The way that they had kids memorize the Hebrew scriptures, what we call the Old Testament, one of the ways that they made them do, or that they had them do that, is, the idea of scripture being sweet. They would actually take essentially their version of a cookie for the verse that they were memorizing, and they would put the verse onto the cookie. And so as you were memorizing it, you were eating sweet, like to connect, hey, this is really sweet as I'm memorizing it. So maybe if you're trying to get into scripture memory on quarantine, cookie time. So just a fun deal. Paul said, provoke implies to me a time when you have a choice and choose an interaction that is that in your heart is wrong, but can't stop yourself. And I would say that's absolutely true. And I think one of the ways that I've heard this described before, we lead a blended family community group, and it's just amazing families. And we did a curriculum this fall called the Smart Step Family that's on Right Now Media if you want to go check it out. Super helpful. And one of the ways that they talk about this is they describe it as quick fix parenting. And I think, at least for me, when I don't want things to be like necessarily like developmental or the best I just want this done. Like I need you. One of the times for me that it's easy for me to get to the wrong place is like we've put our kids to bed. It's been a long day, and they come out and they're like, I need more water, or like like the wind outside is scary. Like I do not show up well in those situations. I'm not careful. And because I'm like, I did the things like I get like an hour and a half. This is my hour and a half. Go to bed, And so I think we all have our trigger point. I'm just going to assume for the sake of sanity.
Well, and it's interesting because I'm a huge fan of the natural consequence when I don't even have to invoke anything and there's something there. That's my very favorite. But the girls have been making a fort in their bedrooms, which has been amazing. Super creative and clever. And it's been fun to watch them spend hours building these things. But I had kind of left them to their own devices, and Anthony went in to look at it, and he came out and he was like, they put tacks in the furniture. Like they had taken tacks from their like bulletin boards and had stuck it into the dresser and the bed to hold the blankets in place. And I was like, well, I mean, in fairness, we'd never said don't put tacks in your furniture.
It's true. You're lucky they didn't use nails.
Yeah. And so I was like, so I think the best thing to do is like go back and we'll have a conversation about why that doesn't, why that's not good. Because our kids are older. And so you can have why conversations. And he was like, well, I already blew up at them. So I think they got it. It's like, oh, okay, we can do it that way too.
Yeah. I mean, that's another approach, Yeah. And I would say that when you provoke your kids to anger, or you find the gift that I think we can give to our kids, if you have kids at home, is confession. Is apology, right? Is that like the same grace that we're saying they need in their life from Jesus, we need too. And so not every day, but multiple times a week, I ask any one of our kids, hey, can you forgive me for that? Like I didn't do that the way I shouldn't say that the way that I needed to say that. I love you. And like, I still fall short just like we all do. And like, I know God is going to forgive me, but would you forgive me? And, like sometimes I'll give them space and it depends a little bit on the kid, but I mean, they're incredibly merciful. But I just think like, how do we model that? We are going to screw up. Like there's just no way around it. And so how we model what that means is super important. Dom said, I'm guessing he means this verse 4. He said, that verse is one I read frequently when my kids were growing up. I'm going to pretend that that's actually Janelle talking. And then she read that over Dom. I don't think that's what's happening, and then Jennifer said, don't sweat the teens too much. Yes, they are challenging and trouble definitely happens. But they're also just hilarious and smart and growing more important or independent and finding out who they are and what they love. Overall, I have loved the teen years. Well, 2 out of the 3 anyway. Teens are pretty awesome. That's great. That's a good encouragement. Thank you very much. And Liz says that your kids found the third way with thumbtacks. Yeah. So
they're clever.
Good. Mission accomplished. All right. So as we think about these verses, Paul kind of continuing to widen out this old self, new self, mutual submission to all people, entering into the family system, husbands and wives last time, now children and fathers. How are you thinking about application to this, ma'am?
For me, it is definitely how can I honor my parents this week? I got a text from my dad yesterday, and it was, I don't know if he meant it this way, and if he's watching, Dad, you could chime in. But it was, I had asked a question and he said, too much to text, call when you have a minute. I read that as you never have a minute. So, we're just going to defer to whenever you can make space and time to have this conversation. And so it's just this reminder for me, and I know this about my parents, all they want is a couple minutes to talk. And for me to be able to make that time is huge for them. And so what does that look like? Kind of even submitting my schedule to make space and time for that conversation.
And I think every system is different. Every family system, I think in my family dynamic, I will just say it is quite common that my siblings, not now, I don't think, but like for a significant period of time, whenever they would talk to my parents, it was because they needed something. And so I tried to be really intentional to like call my mom when I didn't need. I just wanted to say hey. And so for a long time, I study actually normally on Mondays, not at home. I study somewhere way different. So I'm not distracted and can just focus pre-corona. And I would call my mom and we would have a 30, 40-minute phone conversation every Monday morning. And so that's honestly a good check for me is how is that showing up in my week right now, where my schedule has been really different for the last couple of months. That's good. Yeah. As you guys are watching this, if you can think about ways that you're considering applying this text, just drop them in the comments. We would love to include those as well, as we're all kind of processing and thinking about how we show up in this space. Any others, ma'am, as you think about
the other one I think goes then into verse 4. And he says fathers, obviously we talked culturally, but really parents you could put in there. So in what ways am I provoking my kids to anger, especially in this season? I don't know what it is. I mean, we all know what it is, right? We're stuck in our homes with people that usually go to school. We usually have a little bit of a break during the day. And so what is that looking like? And then where do I need to ask for forgiveness?
Yeah. That's good. And if you ever ask your kids, they'll tell you, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Like, hey, is there something that I've done this week that I didn't mean to, but it hurt your feelings that I need to know about so that I can own?
I have one kid that like one thing has dominated her mind. I have another kid that pulls out a scroll and just starts listing all of my.
I got that dynamic for sure. Yeah. Leo would be like, you haven't given me fruit snacks in the last 10 seconds. Maisie would be like, hold on, let me get my journal. Like, oh, goodness. All right. It's like earlier when we were snuggling, you didn't snuggle as long as I wanted to. Like, I am so sorry. I didn't. Yep. Absolutely. And then Vicky says, hold on, let me pull. We got a couple here. Vicky says, how can I change my approach to my children to not provoke their anger? I seem to tend to poke the sleeping bear, sometimes literally. Yeah. And I mean, I think, Vicky, your kids are old enough that honestly, I think when stuff comes up, one of the gifts that you have is to say, hey, I don't need an answer right now, but I'd love to be able to circle back to this tonight or tomorrow and have a conversation about why this has made you so angry, right? Usually it's an expectation we have compared to performance that they have. And so it's like, hey, here's why I need you to do this. Here's why this is frustrating. Here's, whatever. Here's the bigger thing. Help me understand, how can I better do that in a way that is not going to bring about this explosion, right? I think as our kids get older, they can be a part of that conversation in a way that when they're younger, it's more difficult. And then Dom asked the simple question, how can I serve well this week? And I think this is I think this is a great conversation, especially at that grandparent age and stage, to be able to say, how do I care in a way that's really thoughtful? I think, one of the things that I'm really trying to even think about now is like, hey, how do we want to be someday, one day as grandparents, where we're being thoughtful in the way we show up, and how are we being thoughtful about the way we raise our kids so that they can see that as a hope for the future. And then Stacy offered this prayer request. She said, my friend's husband took his life last week and they have 3 daughters. We're praying for them. Drop them in the prayer lists right here. Stacy, thanks so much for sharing that. I'm so sorry. Oh. All right, guys. Well, we have obviously lots to think about from Ephesians. This is just kind of adding to that list. We will talk about the kind of next section of Ephesians tomorrow. Bondservants, or, in the time they would have probably used the term slaves. And so we'll talk about that. There's lots, obviously, of like, whoa, wait, what is Paul like condoning slavery? What's happening in the midst of all of this? And how does this show up today? How do we apply something like this today? Spoiler alert, we do. So hopefully that'll be something that's helpful for you. And then Dom shared, as the kids get older, transparency with them pays big dividends. I think that's true. Like, I think we have to understand the different age and stage that our kids are at and what they need at each age and stage. And when we try to parent our teenagers like they were when they were little kids, we get into a lot of heat. And it's, most of the time, like, kids kind of like let us get away with it. But they know they're kind of playing us at the same time as we think we're playing them. And one of the things I saw a lot in youth ministry was students that were in high school and parents that had kind of missed a moment. They missed a moment because they were traveling a bunch when they were in elementary school, or they missed a moment in middle school or whatever. And they chose to re-engage, but they wanted to re-engage with the same kind of control that you would bring your 10-year-old. And they want to bring that kind of control to their 16-year-old. And it's like, no. You left that window behind. You don't get to go backwards. Like, that's gone now. So you can't make up for lost time. You gotta do what you can do right now. So
do you remember your jars with marbles message? I wonder if linking that would be a good one, just to kind of give that the visual for me was so powerful.
Sure.
But just that reminder of at every stage of our child's lives, we play a different role as to how we parent.
Yeah, absolutely. We can go find that, post that. And then Becky said, as someone who grew up in a home where how I felt literally did not matter, if my parents would have asked and been open to receiving my feedback regarding how things made me feel, it would have been a huge impact in many areas. Absolutely. And I think like it's so hard, right? Like it's so, because for so many of us that grew up in family environments where we go, oh man, and all of us have stuff. Like we all have things we go back and change, right? And so I think how do we inject dialogue into family systems so that kids can speak up? And sometimes it's going to be silly, and we've got a couple of those, and sometimes it's going to be serious, and we got a couple of those, and just being willing to hear it, even when it's hard to hear, is I think really exactly what Paul is talking about here. Don't provoke one another to anger, but how do we be patient? How do we inject peace into our home? So, yep. All right. So thank you so much for joining us, guys. This has been a great conversation. These notes live on as long as the internet does. So feel free to take advantage of those. They are linked in the document. We will be back to continue Ephesians 6 as we kind of round third this week in Ephesians tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Just a reminder, if you need help, want to help, or know someone who needs help, check out For Aurora. We would love to be able to provide that, or to help you provide it for somebody else. It's been absolutely incredible to watch the scale to which that has grown from every month for this many families to every week for this many families. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. All right. And then Buffy says, wait till your kids get into therapy. Holy bananas. It's a great place to stop, Buffy. I appreciate that. That's good. All right, let me pray for us. God, thanks for today. Thank you for just the way that we get to start our day centered around you. And God, as we think about family and family connected to this new self in you, family connected to mutual submission out of reverence for you, I pray that all of these relationships we've been talking about over the last couple of days together would be really reshaped and reformed around what it looks like to follow you well. I know that there's always regret for what our childhood could have been like, or regret for what this could have been like if we'd known it earlier. But God, I pray that we would live in today, that we would trust you with the past, that we would believe for the future, and that we would live in today. God, would you show up in that way that we could find joy today and we could choose this look for our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day. See you tomorrow morning.